Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. We are back. Both of us are back. ADWCTA is back from his vacation in Mexico. You look a lot more tan, not evenly tanned. I guess that's just how you tan.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this. Like I tan really easily. You remember back in East Brunswick, like around middle school, when we would spend the summer like just in the pool, right, in the community pool. So we lived in the same
Yeah.
like community. It's not like a gated community or anything. It's just like they sold houses to us, and we were in the same general area. So, but we did have a pool. I think that was the only thing this community like had that was actually communal. But it opened every summer, and I would go in, and by the end of the summer, I would be very dark. Like you guys, I mean, if you're on the podcast, I guess you may not know, but I'm Asian generally. I'm half Mongolian, half Chinese. But
You're
after
Asian generally.
like generally, like, I'm not like 100% Chinese or anything, but I'm like a little bit darker, I think, than most Asian people. But at the end of a summer, normally when I'm just in the pool all the time, and I never wear sunscreen, of course, I would be darker than like most Indian people. Like you have to be like real South Indian, like Punjabi, to be darker than me, and I would be darker than most black people. And yeah, so I've been locked indoors playing Hearthstone for the last few years of my life, so I haven't been this dark in a while.
Yeah, you actually had vitamin D deficiency too.
I
It
did.
was
And then it magically went away. I have no idea what happened. Like, for 2 years, it was like, oh, you have vitamin D deficiency. You should go out more and take these pills. And I stopped taking the pills, and I didn't go outside more. But it went away.
There's two explanations. Number one is your body is so good at recovering, or you are so good at fighting through, or your body just kind of gave up on you.
Yup.
It's like that check engine light in the car, in which, like, after a while, the check engine light just stops working as well. So you're just like, oh, I'm good.
Yeah. No problems here. But yeah, let's start with the question of the goat. So this is going to be kind of a longish podcast, like the last one. Hopefully not as long, and mostly
Nope.
because at the end of all this, I'm going to do what I said I was going to do on the last Lightforge, but then it was like an hour and 40 minutes already. I didn't really want to like go on with it, which is my little soapbox on balancing and why this change is actually bad for anyone who takes Arena seriously. Um, which I kind of got into a little bit in the beginning, but that was just more like first like thoughts or whatever. The way I view it, I have like 80% of the stuff I did not say in the last Lightforge, and you'll see why I didn't feel the need to say it in the last Lightforge. And I'm not making Reddit posts. I'm not making a special video about this. I feel like I owe it to people to like really explain my views, especially when it's actually like it's on Arena HS. Like Taro kind of took the Lightforge podcast and like summarized my the information I put in there from the last one. So here's the rest of it. I tried to put as much of it into that post as well, as much as possible when I was like responding to people. But here's all of it in one place, and it's really more just to kind of get it out there, not really like a Blizzard is terrible kind of thing. It's just I disagree with their direction, and I think it's going to be bad, and I'm still a little confused about why it's received so positively among the people who are more competitive. But okay, that's at the very end. We're gonna start this whole thing with things you actually care about, starting with hopefully my vacation, following up with our neutral analysis of I'm calling it the dragon meta because we don't know what the next expansion's called, and this is the analysis of the rotation that's not really a rotation, but like a weird back into wild thing that they're doing, right, with the set stuff, and not including the next expansion because we don't know anything about that yet. So I'm gonna call this the dragon meta for now. That's our
See, I think that's totally fair. It's just it is confusing
I mean, it's
because
very
people might
confusing.
think people might think it actually is a dragon meta, as in
Oh, I
dragon.
didn't even think about that.
You didn't think that dragons are a thing,
Well,
like
because dragons
dragons
won't
are.
be a thing in the year of the dragon in
Well,
Arena.
yeah, but you're calling it a dragon meta, so you see how that is
All
problematic.
right, all right. Let's not call it a dragon meta. Let's change this. Let's call it a. I don't know what to call it. They didn't announce the next expansion. They did this really annoying thing where they had two teaser videos that are like fully animated and voiced over with this like witch fortune tellery woman that has like a weird accent that I can't tell. It's supposed to be like Jamaican or whatever. I think it's just because she's a troll, like the actual like fantasy character troll, not like she's an internet troll. and they gave him like a weird Jamaican accent, and I can't understand any of it. But anyway, we'll call it the. I really don't know what to call it. See, you can't kill my name without having a name in mind, or else we come to this like stop.
Well, I didn't know you were calling it this until now. You can call it the rotational meta, the
meta?
new season, like seasonal meta.
Okay. We'll call it the rotation meta.
Yeah, because
new rotation meta.
Sure. But you can't call it the Dragon meta.
Yeah, because what I want to do is I want to call this like whole thing that they're doing now that's coming forward, because they doesn't really have a name and they didn't give it a name. They just said sets will be rotating. But I want to call it the wild rotation system, rather than just a rotation system or a set rotation system, to emphasize the fact that we are not in standard and we are in wild, sort of, right? Like we're more in wild than we are in standard. But we're also not entirely in wild.
Right. It's not wild. It's just it's like the revolving door of expansions.
So wild rotation meta is what I'm going to go with when I talk about that. But this specific one is about literally the first 2 months once the next expansion comes out, without knowing anything about the next expansion. Anyway, we're going to do the neutral overview, and we normally do this all like neutral, classes, everything in one episode of the Lightforge, and it's always like really long and a bit confusing. So we thought we'd break it up this time. So that's why we're doing it. Also, with this new rotation system coming in, the wild rotation system, it's like a lot of sets are going out. Not just the normally rotating sets, but all the other ones from the last year as well, besides Witchwood. And coming in are like not just one expansion, right, that we don't know about yet, but actually they're bringing like 3 or 4 expansions, 3 expansions back in. So it's lots to talk about. Anyway. So we're going to do that, and then Card Good Bad, Scarabag. We said we'd do it last time, and I don't think we did it because it was long. And then we'll go to my soapbox. Okay, that's the schedule. So let's start off with question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT, Merps.
Yeah, how was your vacation?
Question from the GOAT, how's my vacation? Question from the GOAT is brought to you by our patrons, our wonderful patrons, who stick with us and keep the lights on here at the Lightforge. We are at patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. It really helped me, go on this vacation. This is, like we said, right? There's not enough money coming in for the GOAT for either of us to make anything but a poverty level existence on it. Like literally like below the welfare line levels of existence. But as a side gig, it's really nice to be able to play video games, analyze video games, and then get money for like a vacation here and there and like stuff like that. We can also tax deduct all of our video game purchases that is somewhat related to this. Very nice. Anyway, so part of your support from the Patreon, my share of it anyway, has gone into this vacation that I just took. A whole full week vacation that I am back from. I went to Tulum and then Merida afterwards. We kind of went to Chichen Itza on a day, and then instead of coming back to the resort, which is around the Tulum area, we went to Merida, which is a real Mexican city, because neither me nor Brand New, my girlfriend that we went together, neither of us had ever been to Mexico before. So we're like, I feel like we shouldn't just leave Mexico knowing only like Tulum or like Cancun, which are like fake Mexican cities.
Wait, so that was your first time in Cancun as well?
Yeah, it's my first time anywhere in Mexico. I had never like touched the country until now, which is why we're like thinking of a warm place to go. And I'm like, I should really go to Mexico at some time.
It's really cheap around this time too.
Yeah, it's like right before the spring break crowd really comes in, but like great for making sure my seasonal depression does not kill me. So it was really wonderful. Like real great time. We spent 4 nights at a resort, and then 2 nights at a random hotel in Merida. If you guys haven't visited Merida and you're around the area next time in Mexico, I really recommend it. It's a cute little city. Great, like the people just all come out in the parks. It was like celebrations like every night, like something was happening. It was very communal. A lot of colleges around there, I think. It was really good. It's also very close to Uxmal, which is why we did it. I kind of went on this Mayan. So if you don't know, I'm very like, this is one of the reasons why I did Civ before Hearthstone. I'm very interested in like world history generally, and all that stuff. And so the Yucatan Peninsula, which is where all the resorts and stuff are, also happened to be the home of a lot of Mayan ruins. And, you know, unless I'm going to go to Guatemala or Belize anytime soon, this was my chance to see them. So we went to Tulum, Chichen Itza, and then Uxmal. And Uxmal in particular was great, not just because it was like bigger than the rest, but because you can actually climb one of those pyramids. The other ones, they no longer allow you to climb them. So you can get up there, see the whole site, like take pictures. That was really good. And we have a whole bunch of pictures. I think some of them, if you look at my Twitter feed, we've put up some of them. But it was a really good time. And if you can look at me now, if you're like watching me on YouTube right now, you'll see I am a lot darker than I was before I went there. And yes, Merps, by your hand gestures, also a good amount fatter. Merps was like, "How much weight did you gain?" And I actually weighed myself before I went and when I came back, and it's something like 8 pounds. I literally gained something like 8 pounds in this 1 week, and so you know that's always a good thing, right? Fat is happy.
Always a good thing.
Always a good thing.
Wow, especially with your diet and your ability to bounce back, get back into the gym, and really just oh man, take care of your body like a temple, you know?
Exactly like the Mayan temples.
Yes, abandoned and consistently degrading.
That's how I treat my body, like a temple. All right. So that's my short little thing about what I was doing the last week. And while I was on this trip, I spent a lot of time at the resort on the by the pool with my phone connected to a battery, digging through all the cars that are about to come into this meta. There's a lot of bus time that I spent on my phone connected to a battery, digging through all the cars that are coming through this meta, and you get the point. I spent a whole bunch of time relaxing in warm environments or like in transportation, and looking at Hearthstone stuff, specifically trying to figure out what the next meta is going to be. So we have a lot of information about the next meta, like just analysis stuff, right? I was running some numbers, some simple math. I don't know if any of this is going to be groundbreaking, but I also haven't seen anyone really talk about it specifically, which, to be fair, it is like a month away. And this isn't going to help anyone, and we don't know any of the next expansion cards, so this is kind of a preliminary analysis, but I'd like for it to be like the base from which other people as well as we can build upon in our analysis and prediction of what's going to happen in the new rotational meta, the first version of it coming in a month.
Sure. I think a lot of people aren't talking about it because we also don't know a decent chunk of the cards due to the new expansion.
Did they ever confirm? Because I saw, by the way, there's some information that came in. I don't know if you have it handy. There's information that came in from AMA by I think Ixar, where Taro asked a lot of like arena related questions about how exactly they're going to do things. I think one of the key pieces of information that came out is that Discover Arena is going to have its own pool. So whichever sets are in the arena, it's going to have a special like pool of cards. So if you get like Stonehill, Stonehill's not in the next meta, but let's say Stonehill is in the next meta, it will only be able to discover from the sets available in the arena for that meta.
Right. So right now you can't discover from Nax or MSG, but then once the new rotation comes out, because Nax and MSG are there, you can discover stuff from there, but you won't be able to discover stuff from like Ungoro, right?
I was wondering if they said, I don't think they did because I don't remember this, but I'm pretty sure they didn't say anything about whether there's an expansion bonus or not.
Yeah, that has not been confirmed or denied. We just don't know. Yeah. We have no idea.
Assuming Blizzard does what they normally do, which is just to like leave things alone unless they specifically go and touch it. There may be an expansion bonus as well for the expansion bonus, but again, we don't know. So yeah, new meta. Let's start with the most interesting thing. I think we're just talking about the neutral meta right now. So remember, this is a set with MSG in it, which means the neutral cards will only go so far. There's a lot of meta busting cards, and we don't know where they're going to bucket things, which means we don't know what the meta is actually going to be. And this is something we've repeated ever since the bucket system comes in, but now with literally 400 old cards and another 135 new cards that were previously unbucketed coming in. Like, this is going to be the entire meta. We're not just going to be adding some cards into a meta that had been previously bucketed or whatever. This is like the start of Witchwood all over again with the bucketing system. Remember when Witchwood came and the bucketing system came and how bad it was in terms of bucketing? Because people just like, they didn't really know where to bucket the cards and they had to figure it out. They needed to get some stats. It's like that. Not quite as bad because Witchwood is already in and the classic and basic sets are still in. But it's going to be somewhere between that and what you would think of as just getting a new expansion would be for bucketing. So that's our little caveat. Given that, the most interesting thing I noticed in looking through the neutral cards is that healing your face is ramped up by like almost double. So again, we don't know the next expansion coming in, and it may have an expansion bonus, and that may disproportionately weigh everything. So if the next expansion has no cards that heal your face, maybe we're not that far away from the meta you know and love right now. But as of right now, assuming the next expansion has normal amounts of whatever we currently see in the meta, this is going to be a lot of self-healing. Why? Because the vast majority of your lifesteal cards are still in, because that was Witchwood, Swamp Leech, Pumpkin Peasant, Life Drinker, Rotten Apple Bomb, Deranged Doctor. They're all still in the game. And that is a lot of healing your face. So Shroom Brewer is the big one that goes out. But to replace Shroom Brewer, and the Worm, the 5 mana 4/4 Worm, that is lifesteal, you get the following. And remember, the number of cards is available in the meta is going down by like 200 something. So in a much smaller pool, there are actually significantly more life healing cards. And that includes Mistress of Mixture, Gadgetzan Socialite, which heals for 2, Friendly Bartender, which is 1 per turn. Mistress of Mixture, by the way, heals for 4. And Cult Apothecary, which heals for 2 per opponent minion. That's a lot of face healing. And these are all playable, draftable cards. These are not like deep cuts. This isn't even like Life Drinker level. These cards are all going to be better than Life Drinker. Cult Apothecary, maybe not, but like Gadgetzan Socialite, Friendly Bartender, Mistress of Mixture is definitely. So yeah, first observation.
Yay.
This, in case you were wondering what was going to happen in the new meta, we think it's going to be a good amount of face healing compared to what you have right now. What does face healing mean? Face healing means Merps is sad. Very sad.
Well, it works both ways, right? Like, I'm looking at all the early game options that you have, and I'm looking at the disappearance of Tar Creeper.
Yeah,
something like that, and I'm just like, there's always going to be good and bad. And look, I've said this before, we've established this. People have cried and like shouted from the rooftops the death of aggro many times, especially after they nerfed hunters, right? Like they nerfed them into oblivion, and hunters right now stand at I think 42% win rate.
Terrible. We're gonna play them after this. We're gonna
play afterwards.
Yeah.
But if you draft aggro efficiently, there's always a way. Like face is always a viable option unless the game is broken, actually broken. You will find ways, because a good aggro hunter and aggro decks, but mostly aggro hunter, all it needs is consistency in curve and good decision making. That's it. Yeah. That's honestly it. Those are the only 2 things that are necessary, and it's kind of meta proof. Now, it does depend on exactly how far it'll take, right? Like, can you get the consistent 12s, or will you just sort of like settle for a 6 to 7 win average?
It also depends on the meta and what they allow, right? Like if every single deck in the meta is playing 1-drops, Hunter's kind of screwed. If every single deck in the meta is not playing 1 or 2-drops, your aggro Hunter is going to do quite well. Like that's kind of a span here. And so if you're talking about Hunter specifically, there's good and bad, right? Like part of the good is that curve is going to be, and we'll talk about curve after this, it's going to be better. And that's going to help out when you want to go aggressive, because presumably, and this is again another question, right? So we're going to jump into our second topic. Our second topic is a subset of curve. We'll go into the rest of the curve before, but let's talk about one thing specifically because you brought up a Tar Creeper and like Lone Champ and stuff. 3-drops, the top level 3-drops, they're all going to be gone. The best
Yeah.
3-drops left in the game by the tier list is going to be something like Emperor Cobra, and or like Nightmare Amalgam, like stuff like that. So your 3/4s are going to be the top of your 3-drop, like on curve 3-drops, power level. And Cobra,
no more wasps, no more basilisks, no more Frost Rider.
Frost Rider's gone, Egg Napper's gone, Lone Champ, Tar Creeper.
Tar Creeper.
Yep, like,
all
there's
those.
a lot of good 3-drops, and they're all leaving. All of them. Like, I'm looking at the top right now on our like tier list, which is not finalized, but you see stuff like Harvest Golem is near the top again. Like, this is a pretty drastic culling of 3-drops. So one of the things that may happen, and it may not happen, and it will depend on what the next set offers as well, is it going to be viable to start the game at 3 for most decks, outside of Rogue, of course? Or are we going to go back to where 2-drops were pretty much necessary no matter what class you were besides Rogue? Which was kind of the deal before, like, before bucketing was a thing.
Right. I mean, just looking at it, my guess is like, you can't just start on, or what made the 3-drop meta, right, in which everything started on 3 was everything that you stated. The power level of 3s, and really the difference in power level between 2s and 3s, where 3s were just so much better than 2s, so that you put out the Lone Champ, and that dominates any 2-drop. You put out the Tar Creeper, dominates any 2-drop.
The one difference, the one anomaly to that, right, was Stubborn Gastropod when it comes to curve value on 2, and that's gone too.
That's gone, yeah. So, the huge differential between 2s and 3s, and now you have more 1s, and especially like class 1s, right? Like Hunters just got some pretty good 1-drops. All classes got a lot of 2-drops, like the ones that you talked about. And then the difference between 2s and 3s, it's not that huge of a difference anymore. You know, you have some good 2s, 3s have gotten weaker. So if you're trying to start on 3 now, not only are people more likely going to start on 1s and 2, not just my Hunters, you can't really it's not as easy to catch up, because before, if they dropped a 1 and a 2, you drop a Tar Creeper, you might just even out there, right? You probably do even out, unless they have some really good tempo play. But now you drop, in best case scenario, just a 3/4 up against a 1 and a 2. That's a huge difference than a Tar Creeper. So,
I totally agree. I think the 3-drop mentality that everyone kind of has may become busted. And this, of course, depends on the next expansion. It just takes one strong neutral in the next expansion that's 3 mana, that's rare or common, and has an offering bonus. That's all it takes for us to be back in the 3-drop is viable meta. And if there's 2, forget it. We're just right back where we were. So this is all conditioned on what the next expansion brings, right? But if you don't see a powerful 3-drop, that's one thing we'll both be watching for here. Like, we'll be watching for whether a on-curve, powerful, especially defensive 3-drop is going to be available in the next expansion. And if 2 are. If 1 is, we're kind of on the borderline. If 2 are there, then we're back to normal. If none are there, I agree with Merps. I think 3-drop metas are no longer, like, I think you'll need 1s or 2s. A significant amount of them just to stay alive. And that brings us to the second point, which is curves. So what's going on with the curve? Well, generally, there is more curve that's happening everywhere down the curve. There's a little bit of 1-drops, a lot more 2-drops, same amount of 3-drops. Like 3-drops, you may think like, oh, all the like 3-drops are getting removed. There's gonna be no more 3-drops left. No, you actually have about the same amount of 3-drops being offered to you. They're just like not as powerful. 4-drops, there's a lot more 4-drops, a little bit more 5-drops, about the same amount of 6-drops. A little fewer 7-drops, about the same amount of 8-drops, but at this point, these aren't really drops. So they're not really part of your curve in the traditional sense. But basically, there's just more, right? There's just more curve happening everywhere. More specifically than that, there's a lot more happening at 2 and 4. So at 2 drops, you will have a lot more consistency. And again, bucketing may screw with this. If they take all of these and bucket them on bucket 7, that gets a 50% reduction rate in the amount they're offered. So you never know, right? But these are what I consider like viable to be played on turn 2 kind of like drops. And there's a lot more 4 drops as well. I think in the prior meta, 4 drops are already being like they were okay. If you're talking about Boomsday, you remember we had a 4 drop shortage. It was like see a 4, take a 4, right? That's what we told you. And if you followed it, you were good. If you didn't, you were running a pretty high risk of not actually curving out on 4. Rastakhan kind of alleviated all that by putting in a good amount of 4 drops. And we're going to go even better than that. If you remember from before bucketing was a thing, 4 drops were everywhere. Like, that was the one part of the curve you almost never had to worry about. You worried about your 2s sometimes. You rarely worried about your 3s. You never worried about your 4s. And that's kind of flipped in the last year or so. But now there's going to be a ton of 4s again. You're not going to have to worry about your 4s. And 2s, there's going to be enough that you will be able to curve out if you like choose to do that and like pick those cards. Whereas right now it's still a little spotty, right? So those are good parts of the curve. Something else about the curve. Do you want to? Do you have any like thoughts on how that would impact stuff? Just it being more curve wise, because I'm gonna go into like over curve cards after this, like cards that are above your normal curve.
I think necessarily everything is going to shift a little bit faster, just because on one hand, we have some really good small cards coming out, right? So we have the Zombie Chows, we have the
Mistress of Mixtures.
Mistress of Mixtures. We also have the Haunted Creepers, and then the Friendly Bartenders, etc. But on the other hand, the big drops have gotten worse, right? You're replacing some really good big drops with some like kind of meh big drops. Violet Worm, right? The if you are looking at the end game for the current meta, right? I would say it's like the Violet Worm meta. Right. if we're just trying to define the late game right now, because that's the late game minion of choice, and you see it so often. You have to be prepared for a late game Violet Worm. Maybe not exactly in turn 8, but at some point during the game, your opponent is going to play one, because that's just how it goes. And that's gone. So, and with that gone as well, you're not just taking something big, you're taking something that was really annoying, like something really hard to get rid of that usually required 2 cards or your minions on the board plus something else as well. So it really changes the way that the end game is structured as well. So you don't have this huge fallback. Like, not all decks have a Violet Worm to fall back into. So that means a couple of things as well. Number one, you know that your opponent doesn't have that. So you're just like, okay, well, I won't get like grinded down by a Violet Worm. And number two, you're just like, well, it's not really worth it for me to draft all these crappy big things. So I should just go faster. So everything's pointing at you from the the abundance of small cards and lack of like big cards. It's just pushing you to go earlier and go faster.
Yeah, not just Worm. Primordial Drake is gone. All your 9-drop giant taunts, your Sleepy Dragon, your that other thing that's 9 mana and whatever is gone. I think there's more than Sleepy Dragon. Yeah, Mastodon. Mastodon's gone. The new one that's like 214 with a Divine Shield and Taunt. Enforcer, right? Enforcer's right. Gone. Like, your top is looking very thin. You're going, in fact, at the top, on 9 mana, here's what remains, right? At 8 mana or above in neutrals. We're going to list out all the cards that remain at 8 mana or above. Splitting Fester Root. Not like, it's there, right? Ghanaian Royal Guard is still there, but that's an initiative card. Deranged Doctor is still there. But that's just an 8 mana 8/8 when it comes to like actual size. Its good part is that it heals you. Cauldron Elemental is there. That's not really a thing. Blood of the Ancients is coming back. That's a 9 mana 9/9. Again, not good.
So good.
Eldritch Horror is coming back. 8 mana 6/10 vanilla. Are you excited yet?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? You look at all this, you're just like, oh man, that's definitely so good.
And the last card coming back that's 8 mana or more is Faceless Behemoth, which is a 10 mana 10/10, if you remember. That's right. For 10 mana, you only get a 10/10. That's what this game used to be about. Don't pick that card. So yeah, that's kind of the late game. And when you don't have late game, you're gonna go faster. So building on Merps' thing about you're gonna take more earlier cards and maybe more curve cards now that there's more curve cards and curve is more important. Curve is even more important than that because your curve busters are being disproportionately removed. So there's still going to be some curve busters, but for the most part, the big ones, the Keening Banshees, the Hildnir Frost Riders, the Stubborn Gastropods, the Basilisks, Replicating Menace, Mashag Announcer, Bittertide Hydra, Frozen Crusher, they're all gone. So you do have some things left when it comes to curve busting. So curve busting means you're playing a curve stone game, you play 2, I play 2, you play 3, I play 3, you play 4, I play 4, and then I play like 8/8 for 5 mana, and you're like, ah, crap, the fact that I have the curve doesn't matter anymore. Right? Like, I just lost the board because he played a 5 mana 8/8. That kind of stuff, where you're purely curve busting by playing a better curve card. Not removals, not conditional cards, just like a better curve card for some negative somehow, or some like vague conditional, like you can't have anything else on the board, or you're like milling your own cards, or you're discarding cards, or just something that doesn't affect tempo on the board, right? Those are gone. Like
4 mana 7/7 though.
4 mana 7/7, yeah. So we're analyzing neutrals right now. Let's not get into the classes and how they.
But that was the original. Just like what?
Yeah. I never thought that card was that great, and I've liked it a little bit more before I got rotated out, like as the game went on. But I still don't think it's like a terribly broken card or anything, because it's still just a 7/7, right? Like at the end of the day. But yeah, so now I'm going to list out, and I'm not like leaving any cards out here. These are all of the non-legendary neutral cards that are above the curve. And for this, I'm going to start on 3. Because if you're talking about Haunted Creeper, for example, which is above the curve, but it's on 2. It's not busting any kind of curves, right? Like, it's helping you establish the curve, but it's too small to actually bust the curve. So, you have Higher Gun. Maybe. It's a 3 mana 4/3 with Taunt. It's a little better than it should be. But generally, on curve 4/3s aren't that good. So, it's probably not all that curve busting. Emperor Cobra. If you're ahead, Emperor Cobra will do the wasp thing, right? It'll bust the curve for you. Harvest Golem. Potential trade with a body. That's it for 3s. On 4s, you're only going to have one card that busts the curve. It's Daring Reporter. And again, you have to have the board. It's a snowball card, you have to have the board, but it will bust the curve given a couple turns. On 5, you have a whole bunch of cards that still remain. Corrupted Healbot's a 5 mana 8/8. Ventricle Mercenary still there. Frostwolf Warlord still there. You have Validated Doomsayer, which is a 5 mana 7/7 if you have the board. And Cyclotron potentially, also above tempo for what it should be. So until you get to 5 mana, you basically don't have curve busters anymore. And this ties into the fact that if you are trying to and you successfully secure the board on the 1 mana and 2 mana cards, you're going to have the board all the way through to 5 mana. At which point it could be busted, but the way these cards are functioning as busting your curve, if you are the one ahead on the board, it's Corrupted Healbot and nothing else. All the other ones require the person playing the curve buster to be behind to already be ahead on the board. So these are snowball curve busters. They're not defensive curve busters like we had before. Like Lone Champ is a defensive curve buster. Why? Because you can't have the board. Hildnir Frost Rider, defensive curve buster. So we're going to set up a different kind of game in which the value of getting curve stone going is now going to be higher than it's been in a year.
Yeah, the only thing that I see as actual sort of curve busters, or you get more than what you should, is something like Second Rate Bruiser, and
that's true.
Also the Spike
Second Rate Bruiser, by the way, 4/5 for 5 mana with Taunt, but it costs 2 less mana, so it's only a 3 mana 4/5 with Taunt. If your opponent has, I think, like 3 or more creatures, right?
Yeah, 3 minions or more.
Mm-hmm.
So Conditional though, right?
Yeah.
It's conditional. It's not like the bitter tide hydras that you were talking about, in which you could just drop it at any point for 5 mana 8/8.
Yep. And again, it's curve busting, but you have to be it's conditional on you basically playing multi-bodied creatures because you're not going to get like 3 things uncontested by turn 3 or anything, right? Yeah. So I don't know how many people who were excited about the coming meta is also excited about Curvestone, because every time, like, I like Curvestone. I don't find anything really wrong with Curvestone.
Me too.
But yeah, I mean, you obviously like Curvestone. It's a very aggressive way to play Hearthstone.
Well,
and
I like playing Curvestone when no one else plays it.
Right, exactly. You'll Curvestone even when the opponents are ignoring the curve and like punishing you for curving out. But I don't know, like a lot of people seem to like a little bit more like high swing type stuff. And that stuff will still be in there because this is MSG. Remember, we're going to get the board clears. There will still be stuff, comeback mechanisms. But when it comes to actually Curvestone, that is also going to be stronger. So Curvestone's going to be stronger, Healing's going to be stronger. I'm going to throw in the final observation on the neutral meta, which is that it kind of goes with Merps is like big things are, there's fewer like big things at the end to anchor your decks. There's less big taunts to anchor your deck. The total amount of health taunted that you can put into a deck is going to go down significantly. Now, again, new expansion coming in. If they come out with 2 sleepy dragons, well, we're back in a very taunty meta. But we've gotten rid of all 9 and all 8 mana taunts. And we reduced the number of 7 mana taunts from like 5 to 2. And that's the top. So your big taunts, when you think Sleepy Dragon and like stuff like that right now, are instead going to be your Furious Etin and your Bog Creeper. Your Bog Creeper, by the way, is like a Furious Etin, but with more normal stats. So it has 8 health with 6 attack instead of 5 attack and 9 health. So yeah, that's the top. And you're not getting compensated by like a lot of smaller taunts either. There's a few taunts at 5 mana. That's you're gonna have more 5 mana taunts than you did before, but it's not going to like compensate for missing all those giant taunts. And that's gonna be a pretty big deal on the meta when it comes to the speed of the meta. So rather than taunting, which limits the use of your board but rewards you for being able to deal direct damage and for finishing the game early, you are now going to, one, you're going to stabilize a little earlier because you're going to have more 5 mana taunts than you did before. So it's easier to take the pressure off. But 2, you're not going to have these like game-winning large taunts that just block your opponents from doing anything, right? Like think about those warrior taunts and like stuff like that. That's no longer going to be a thing, which means the board is more powerful because you can now get through taunts more easily because there's fewer of them and they taunt for less ridiculously high health. And the board is more important because your opponent's also going to heal more now to their face. So having that reach doesn't really do you all as much good if your opponent can heal out of it. So you can't just like top deck your reach, and like waiting a turn to use your reach even has enhanced risk. So the whole shape of the game is going to change into a more board-centric version of aggression. Which, you know, is exactly what Merps likes. But when this all happens, I don't know how special like aggro hunter is going to be if everyone has 2 drops and everyone's healing their face and everyone has 5 mana taunts instead of 9 mana taunts. Like, you're not slipping under any. I'm just using that as an example, but I think the overall meta becoming like that will reduce the uniqueness of a fast hunter, but it'll open up aggro for a lot more classes and a lot more like consistency in being able to build an aggro deck.
Which I think will ultimately win out, because here are constants, right? We talk about variance in all metas, but here's the constant thing that I see. No matter how fast like the field goes, it's never anywhere close to how fast I can make a hunter. Like, right. That's sort of the bottom line. And then at the end of the day, because there's so many forces pulling people towards like true mid-range or like a little bit control, right? And then those forces that pull them away from my very polarized end is really good for me. And I just go in the complete opposite direction. So it's like, you're going kind of fast. All it does is shift me to go super fast. So the delta between a true aggro hunter and then the rest of the field, I think that delta can always be built with a good buffer. The danger point is if you, and by you I mean anyone, build a quote aggro hunter with a very small delta, right? So you don't have that consistency, you don't have that speed, and then you just get kind of run over like every other game.
Yeah. I agree. Like there's one drops that are out, but the good ones all heal your opponent, which is really not that great of a thing. But Hunter does get a class 1 drop specifically, so we'll see how it shakes out. But yeah, the whole meta is gonna move faster, and it's gonna shift more to be on the board. Like this is all good stuff as far as we're concerned. The MSG bad stuff, that's gonna come in when we do the class analysis, and it will tell you eventually how much any of this matters. Which is, spoiler alert, the conclusion is gonna be this matters unless you're facing one of like 3 particular classes, in which case none of this really matters. So you're gonna win or lose based on your matchup, and that's not very good as far as like a game is concerned, to walk in and know you're gonna win or lose based on your matchup. Not that Rosticon was like the best about that, but this was particularly a problem with MSG, and that's going to come back. But if you look at the bones of this, right, the neutral bones of this for the people without the broken cards, it's very good. This is more back to the basics, right? This is what people wanted for people who wanted wild. This is what people wanted for people who wanted fundamentals. The meta itself, at its core, is going in a very different direction than, well, I don't even know if it's a very different direction, but it's going to look very different than what the prior meta looks. And that huge shakeup, it's going to be interesting if nothing else. And we'll go into how classes interfere with this later. But the bones are good. Okay. And again, just caveating again, we don't know anything about the next expansion. So this could all be crap if like the next expansion has a bunch of taunts or like a bunch of whatever else in neutral. We don't know. And we'll talk about it once we see the card dump. Because Blizzard, they don't really tell people what neutral cards are until the card dump. They have like a third of all the neutral cards out, and the card dump happens, and the rest of the neutrals come out. So we won't know for a while. Okay, that's a pretty good overview, I think, of the neutral meta. And I want to say, I really hope Blizzard will actually announce the expansion with a couple cards over the course of the next week. So the next Lightforge, we can talk about our hopes and dreams for this next expansion. And then we'll have a couple of episodes after that to cover all the classes specifically before we do the card dump and the card reviews and things like that. So that's what's coming up with the Lightforge. Tune in. I may not like this new system that Blizzard's implementing next year, but it is definitely good for content, because there is a lot of information you need to download to be successful. Like, there's going to be the barrier of entry to be a competitive player has just risen by like a ton if you look at it in the aggregate of like a year. And if you're listening to this podcast, I assume you're at least mostly a competitive player. I don't mean necessarily you're going to be on the leaderboard, but you want to get higher wins. And so you're going to need to learn more stuff quicker than you've been doing before. A lot of this stuff is the same applicable fundamental skills, but the meta-specific skills, that's being taken to a whole new level by Blizzard. All right, so that's a new rotation meta. We're running a bit short on time. I'm gonna delay Scarabag again. I don't really. Scarabag will just be the card good bad that never happens. We're gonna be deep into the next meta, and we'll be like, "Hey, remember Scarabag? Oh yeah, that card that no longer exists in this meta. Let's talk about it."
All right, so is it time for your soapbox? Is it time for me to sit back?
Time for my soapbox. All right. So this is what some of you have been waiting for, and the rest of you can tune out right now, because I'm going to go into a long lecture / half rant about why this new change that Blizzard's done, which is it's going to put in a few sets every 2 months and then swap those sets out and put new sets in the arena, is going to be bad for competitive players. So let's start at the basics here. And I don't think Blizzard will like disagree with most of what I'm saying. That's the thing. Like, I don't think it's a controversial point that I'm making here. And like there's very few times where I'm like, I don't think Blizzard disagrees with me, because usually when I'm disagreeing with Blizzard, Blizzard would disagree with me. Here, we're kind of on the same page. I'm just, I don't know why the people in what I call the loser group, meaning the competitive players in this whole decision making process, are like all on board with this whole thing. Anyway, let's start at the basics. What is balance? I run into this a lot. I'm the balance designer for Gods Unchained, an upcoming TCG, and talking to designers over there, talking to people who work on the game, who are all, you know, TCG players, some very long time TCG players, and they have a general idea of what balance means, right? But I run into this idea a lot where sometimes it's not like a cognitive, like, oh, I don't understand this, and more of a, oh, that's right, you have to do this too. And in my head, I'm like, that's like most of the job. Like, that's like most of what I'm doing. For some reason, a lot of people default to the idea, and Blizzard talks about it too. I'm pretty sure their balance team is much more sophisticated than this, but in their communications with the public, a lot of times it seems like they think that balance means you have 50% win rate. You see them set this up a lot, right? Like, why do we micro adjust? We want all classes to have 50% win rate. Why do we have buckets? We want all cards to be picked X% of times, right? That is all fine and good. That is balance at its most literal form. If you have a 50% win rate, you're technically balanced. But you know what else has a 50% win rate? Coin flipping has a 50% win rate. And if I turn a game like Hearthstone into pure coin flipping, I would still have, by this definition of balance, a balanced game. So when we're talking about balance, we need to go deeper than that. We don't just mean 50% win rate. If you just create a game with a 50% win rate, here's another example. Going first versus going second. Take away the coin, take away the card. It's a balanced game. Why? What if going second you only win 40% of the time and going first you only win 60% of the time? Well, you have a 50-50 chance of being first or second, right? Balanced game. This is not what we mean by balance. This gets you, I think, 25% of the way there. It's really the baseline. Like, if you accomplish this in a game when it comes to balancing, you failed. Like, if you accomplish nothing else than just this, you have not succeeded in balancing the game. No one will think you have succeeded in balancing the game. But it's weird how discussions seem to end up on this point and make it a very important point. It's like, but 50% win rate. It's either like our target or like, we're 1% off. Is that enough? What if we're 3% off? We talk about it too when it comes to the class win rates, right? Like, what's the percentage? That's baseline, right? Like, we talk about it because Blizzard somehow hasn't gotten it at a level that is very close. I mean, they've gotten it recently, but there are metas in the past. Many of them where the win rates got ridiculous, and you're like, this is base level stuff, right? This is super basic stuff. Do something about it. Okay, so what's next, right? What's deeper balancing? The deeper balancing is one element is what I call diversity. I say this makes up another 25% of the balancing pie chart. And diversity just means, to me, it means different paths of victory. Like, I want to do this with this set of cards or with this particular strategy. And I need this to work out generally, if I have the same skill as my opponent, to work out about the same, about the same amount of times. So if I am using an aggro strategy and my opponent is using a control strategy, I want to overall, once I hit play, not that I'm facing this particular opponent, but that I'm facing a pool of random decks that my opponents could play. I want this to end up being a 50% win rate for both of us, or a 60% win rate for both of us. Doesn't matter what the number is. It just matters that we have the same win rate because we're similarly skilled. We've just chosen to pursue different strategies, or different classes, or different strategies within the same class, or different strategies in different classes. This is diversity. In Hearthstone, it manifests itself in classes, it manifests itself in archetypes, it manifests itself in certain types of cards you may want to use. And this is really hard to do. This is probably the hardest part to do. It's easy to understand. If you think of an RPG, you're like, well, why would you select this character over that character? They all kind of have to perform roughly the same. Otherwise, one character's OP, right? Or one character is like, needs to be buffed. That's where you get this sense of balance. I call it diversity because the game is balanced without it. You can just always select the most powerful thing, right? If only control works in this particular meta, it's technically balanced. You should just play control. Like, why are you playing aggro? You're dumb, right? But in a game without aggro, people usually don't think that that's like a fully balanced game. I view this as the finishing touches in balance. It's very hard. The amount of effort you have to put in to get diversity out versus the amount of diversity you're actually going to be able to get. It's a lot of input for risky and varying amounts of actual balance. So the final area that I'm going to address is what I think 50% of balancing work is about. This is what I think balancing is at its core. If you have a 50-50 win rate and then you have this next element, you get a C on balancing. You get a 75, even if you have none of the diversity stuff, because it is just that important, and because you could do a very good job or a very bad job, and because you should be able to do a very good job. This is not too hard. And this is what I call fairness. Fairness, whatever we end up arriving at, and people will have different points in which they think, I want to hit this target of fairness. But whichever target of fairness you're targeting, you need to be able to hit it. And fairness is the application of skill, the type of skill that your particular game favors, to win rates. And that includes swing. So it's not just how much skill you have to win, but also the percent, how much skill gives you what percent chance to win. If it's 100% skill gives you 100% chance to win, then you have something that ends up looking very similar to like chess. It may not be very interesting, it may not be your target, but that's the balance. So Hearthstone has a particular marker that it wants to set for how much skill is applied to win rate, and it has another particular marker for what that means, right? Like maybe my target is 75%. I think that's a fair win rate for a good player against a average player. You get to win 3 times out of 4. If you win more than that, then the game's not really too random enough, and the swings are not big enough, and you have kind of like chess and no one's interested in it. If you go too low, then you're getting very close to rolling the dice, and again, it's a little less interesting. The next part you figure out is the type of skill that you need to focus on. So you could make the game dependent on skills like memorizing a set of rules, right? Then that'll be like a test. You have the right answers, you get a higher grade than someone else, and then you throw some randomness in there somehow, right? To make sure you only win 75% of the time. You can have the skill be math, you can have the skill be counting, you can have the skill be game knowledge, you can have the skill be anything. Normally in a strategy game, you try to limit those other elements, like I call them the lesser skills: reading, memorization, math, counting, like that stuff I'm not good at. And you want to increase deep strategy. That's stuff like game theory, stuff like predicting what your opponent's going to do, stuff like making advanced reads, like just I can't explain it in a different way. It's stuff that strategy games that makes you feel like you've like outsmarted your opponent, not outchored your opponent. If when you win the game, you think, I've worked so much harder than my opponent, and I have washed 18 million dishes, and he's only washed 1,000 dishes, and so I deserve the victory. That's not the feeling I think most games are trying to go for. So anyway, that's my definition of balance. It's 25% getting the 50-50 win rate, 25% diversity, that's the hard part, and then 50% skill converting into wins at the appropriate amount of swing and RNG and RPS and all that stuff. Okay. So the second misconception, besides balance, that I want to attribute is, and I got this comment on Reddit, and I was like, really? People believe this? And then I thought about it, and I was like, oh, I guess it makes sense that people believe this. I've never believed this. And this is the statement that leaderboard, the win rates of leaderboard players at the top, that measures the amount of skill that's applied in a meta. The argument is simple. If a meta is really rewarding of skill, then the good players are going to get better averages. If a meta is not rewarding of skill, then the good players are going to get fewer averages. That's not true. Because the leaderboard measures not skill into win rate, but rather how much swing there is. All leaderboard does, in the way Hearthstone has set it up, is to measure high roll. If you have a very swingy meta, where games swing back and forth a lot, then on a 30-game set, you're going to get a higher win rate than if you had a low swing meta, even if the low swing meta, as low swing metas usually are more indicative of skill. So I don't know how exactly mathematically it evens out. I haven't like done the math on this, and it's going to be pretty deep if you try. But that's a huge critical flaw that affects every single usage of leaderboard win rates as an indication of how much skill goes into the meta. Like someone getting 10 wins per run does not mean that like that meta requires more skill or rewards more skill than if the top win getter is like 9. And it's not like you can't average the top 30 players or anything like that. What you would instead have to do is to track a true average of some enough sample size of a particular set of players like identified beforehand, not based on their win rate afterwards, but based on you think they're good before you start measuring, and then you have to make sure they're like trying hard to win, right, in the entire time. So you're not going to be able to do that. This is not going to happen. So we're never going to get this stat. So there's no way to measure this that we have available to us. Okay, so that's all set up. I have time. Now let's get into my points, because I have yet to like say anything about why rotating sets is bad for competition or bad for balance or any of that. So let's start with the first point, the actual point that I'm going to make about the new rotation meta, the wild rotation meta that we're entering, where new rotations come in every 2 months and then they go out 2 months later, and in the middle Blizzard balances them a bunch. Blizzard, by the way, has said they're going to balance in 2 to 3 days, and then afterwards presumably in some rate. But the first balancing is going to be in 2 to 3 days. It's going to be quick balancing. All right. So let's start 2 years back here. 2 years back, 3 years back. Let's go 3 years back. Why stop at 2? 3 years back, Blizzard wasn't balancing stuff. Nah, it's actually 4 years back. 3 years back, they were already doing little things. But 4 years back, they're not really balancing things. And Arena Warriors Matters happens, and literally the only complaint in Arena Warriors Matters is that Warriors are not balanced. Please do something about balancing, because you haven't done anything about Arena balancing or said anything about it. We're in a different world now. All the things that Blizzard has done between that point and this current point today, before these amount of changes, are some variation of solving low-hanging fruit problems. These are problems that were inherent in the game mode and inherent in the balancing, and they just didn't do anything about it until the game was released and people complained about it, and it took them like 4 years to get to this stage. But they're low-hanging fruit because they benefit all types of players. If you are a player who may play the arena, these changes would have balanced you. You could be a competitive player, you can be like a vaguely casual player, you can be a competitive constructive player who's just playing some arena for like the fun of it, right? You could be a hardcore arena player, you can be any of those players. All of those changes were better for all these people. That's why they're called low-hanging fruit. Everybody wins because Blizzard spent time and effort, or at least they would win in the long term. Now we're in a different world. Apparently, Blizzard has gotten to the point where they're like, all right, all these things that help everybody, we're done with all of that, right? Like, what have we done? We've balanced the classes with micro adjustments. That's always going to be balanced now. We have this new bucketing system that'll make all decisions that people make very impactful. That was brilliant on our part. And we have this whole huge collection of cards, and a lot of people want to play with it, but Wild gets a little too crazy, so let's do a rotational meta. This has been suggested by a number of Hearthstone players. Like, we've had guests on the Lightforge podcast. I think Collins was a big proponent of this exact kind of like scenario. I don't know if it's like 2 months or whatever, but of some scenario where they rotated card sets in and out. I know Ratsma, even like way back in the day, had a very similar idea. So it's been an idea that's floated around the arena community, backed by very good players, and Blizzard said, all right, this seems like a good idea, and people will like it. But this particular change creates winners and losers, unlike the previous changes. The winners are the people who are playing Arena for fun. And there are people who are playing Arena to be interested in it. They could include competitive players, because we all play Arena for various reasons, right? Like, no one just plays the game for one reason only. But the losers are whatever percentage of you or percentage of the person we're talking about that cares about balance. What is lost in this change that I am very upset about is not just current balance. Current balance is like gone, right? That's why I made the comment. Next 3 months are going to be it's going to be a clusterfuck. It will be. It will be somewhere between Taverns of Time and a okay like normal meta. It's because that's how they set it up. They set it up as the midway point between Taverns of Time and the normal standard meta. So why is that so? Why do I think balance is the losers? Balance. People who care about balance are the losers in here. You could even start with just standard and wild, right? Let's start at the basics. We're moving out of standard. We're not moving into wild. We're moving somewhere between standard and wild. If you are a constructed player, you can look at how balanced wild arena is versus how balanced wild constructed is versus how balanced standard constructed is. Wild constructed is way less balanced. it's meant to be way less balanced because there's no one that's really there making sets for Wild, right? They'll do a nerf here and there if things get really out of hand. But for the most part, Blizzard doesn't care about it as much. There's not a lot of tournaments for it that's supported. The Blizzard Championships is just like standard. There's nothing like exactly wrong with it, but that's just the amount of competitive support these different formats get. On top of that, older sets are just less balanced. Again, these are things that Blizzard does not disagree with me on. These are things that really no one should disagree with me on because they're just. I know it feels like very like hokey to say it, but they're just the truth. Like that's why Blizzard's not denying it or anything. It's because they just think other things outweigh it at the end. So, MSG especially, right? You'll see the less balance in it very, very clearly when it comes to the arena. In addition to that, we're also the losers because of balance bucketing timing, right? Like Blizzard has X amount of time to balance things. Let's say you believe that Blizzard's going to do a much better job at balancing and bucketing than they used to do, for whatever reason. They haven't really done anything different. Rastakhan was balanced by the same group of people that's going to balance the next expansion and all the buckets, right? And yeah, it's better than it was a year ago, but it's hardly great. These issues are going to be compounded because instead of having to balance 135 cards in the arena by bucketing them correctly, they're going to have to do every 2 months. So in half the amount of time, they're going to have to do like 4 times the amount of cards, maybe 3 times the amount of cards. And every time these sets rotate out and they rotate back in, they're in a different meta, like a totally different meta, because that's the point, right? They're going to be mixed with other sets and they're going to be totally different. So their usages are going to be also different. And more important than that, when you take a set out and you put it back in, like let's say 6 months later, the information dissemination is going to stop. So Blizzard buckets things and balances it based on how people pick. Not based on the win rate, but based on how many people select a card. So that card selection in the arena drafts are going to be an interesting thing for the average player always. In order for a card that is either complicated, and by complicated I mean Ascetic Swamp Ooze. I don't mean like Defile levels of complicated. But Defile would get even crazier, which is why Defile is not a top bucket card, even now. For that information and feeling to get disseminated down to the bottom, and by the bottom I mean casuals or constructed players who pop into the arena now and then, they make up the vast majority of games played at Blizzard's data and people Blizzard care about, not us. That information dissemination over the course of like, let's say a year, it happens. Eventually people are like, oh, this card that was like in Witchwood or whatever is actually not good in arena. Like, Howling whatever, the Merps, what is this card? It's 4 mana 3/3. It becomes a 6/6 if the board is empty.
Night Prowler?
Night Prowler, right? Like eventually people are like, even like plebs are like, oh yeah, Night Prowler, probably not a great card in the arena. And the pick rates reflect that, and then it gets moved down. And it took almost an entire year for that card to be moved from like the 2nd bucket or wherever down to the 7th bucket where it belongs. That's not going to happen anymore. Because you're only going to have 2 months rather than 10. And when the information stops in the middle and you don't play with that card anymore and people don't talk about it anymore, the collective knowledge of Night Prowler being a bad card and how it trickles down to the bottom is going to be slower than even the amount of time that is actually in the meta. Because it's not continuous. So that's at least my theory on it. But regardless, even if you're not going that deep into it, just know that they have half the amount of time to balance 3 to 4 times the amount of cards. And that should scare you in and of itself. And once they balance it, rather than stick with most of them for like the next set or whatever when it comes out, it's all going to be rotated out again. So you're just going to get a new meta of unbalanced cards. So yeah, eventually they may get to the same point that we are today, right? They may get there, but it's going to take them like at least half a year, probably a whole year. And in this whole year, we're still going to be here. And that brings me to my next point, which is that we are still, as an arena community, permanent beta testers for Blizzard, which really annoyed me when the synergy picks change came out. And we were like, what the hell, Blizzard? Did you test this internally at all? And they were like, sort of, but nope. We treat you guys as beta testers. And we were like, wait, what? Did you just come out and say that? And that's your intention? And Blizzard was like, yep. Like Ben Brode was literally like, yeah, huh? And I was like, okay, I hope that's not true. And at that point, everybody was pretty against being beta testers. They wanted some internal testing, some, just normal stuff. Now I think people care less about it, probably because we've been in vague forms of this for, what is it, like a year and a half now? But nothing's changed. They've gotten smarter people there, right? Like, I'm sure Chalky is better at doing this than the people they had doing this before. They got a new analytics guy that is probably better than their own analytics guy, I assume, if they had one before that was doing stuff for the arena. But they're committing harder to this. They're committing harder to this permanent beta tester thing. And that wouldn't even be a problem if after you beta test, you can release a build and then the build is balanced. But they're not going to. Every single year, at 2 points, very consistently, they have blown up the entire arena balance, whatever they've achieved or not achieved up to that point, and they've just tried something else. Every single 2 out of 3 expansions, they would do this right before the expansion. And at least 50% of them would really heavily move the meta in a way that they have no idea what it's actually going to do. And we're just along for the ride. Now, if you're thinking like, oh yeah, it may take a little bit longer time for Blizzard to balance this rotation expansion meta, but after a year or something, right, all the old sets are going to be balanced in terms of bucketing, and everything's going to be fine, and we're going to be back where we were in terms of balancing, but with a much more diverse and interesting meta. But that's not going to happen. It could happen, just like in a month, the expansion could have been released in standard and we would have had the most balanced meta ever. I've been saying consistently for 6 months that we are in the most balanced arena meta ever. The best, most balanced arena meta ever. Consistently for 6 months. It just gets better and better and better. And it was going to take a huge step forward with the next rotation because 3 problematic sets are rotating out and a new set's coming in. It was going to be great. And they just blew it up. And looking back on it, I shouldn't have been surprised, because they blew everything else up too. And they're going to blow this one up as well. You have no reason to believe, and all of history to believe, that sometime in the next 6 months to a year, they're going to blow this system up too when it comes to balance. The system may not go anywhere, but they're going to add another wrinkle to it that's significant enough that more than half of their balance work that went into it beforehand is going to be garbage. And that's just their philosophy. We're along for the ride as permanent beta testers, and I'm getting sick of it. Like, they had gotten to the point where balance was going to be really good, and they're going to go backwards now. A lot backwards. Not backwards to 6 months ago, but they're going to reset this backwards to more than a year ago. Or maybe not more than a year ago. Maybe to a year ago. And they're going to keep doing this. So, I don't know. That's... Maybe the people who play Arena are just done with all that, and they're like, yeah, we're accepting that we're going to be guinea pigs, and we're okay if a balance meta happens 25% of the time, 30% of the time. We'll take what we can get when it comes to balance. Which brings me to my third point. These changes, I have never claimed that they are bad for Arena overall, because they may not be. I don't know if they're good or bad. I said all these things that are bad about it, but they do have positives, none of which I dispute. It's going to be more interesting, right? Yeah, it's going to potentially, hopefully, get more people involved in the arena. It's going to do all this other stuff potentially. But the thing to remember is that the costs are real. And I don't think people are internalizing the cost correctly, because the benefits, except for that it will be more interesting and that it will be more variety, all the other costs that I mentioned are 100% going to happen. And all the good stuff that may happen, like new players joining the arena or whatever, those are iffy. Those are not guaranteed. They could happen, they could not happen. Like I said, we'll see how much of whatever happens. If you're wondering, this is why I'm not petitioning Blizzard to make a change. I haven't made a single post about it on Reddit, a single thread about it on Reddit. I've only answered questions and people's misconceptions. I haven't tweeted at anybody in Blizzard. Or I'm not trying to get them to change anything, because it may not be bad for the arena overall. I don't have a leg to stand on in telling Blizzard to make this change. They'll see how much this is good. But one thing that is guaranteed and that Blizzard cannot dispute is that Arena will be less balanced. Even if the positives end up outweighing the negatives, which one is not guaranteed overall, but if it is overall, it's really not guaranteed to be true for competitive players. That's where we're at. Let's see what else. Let's do a short analysis. If you're wondering, like, well, how do I start like considering this? Right? Is the benefits going to outweigh the negatives? Well, depends on how. These are the factors if you're writing out an equation. It's how good the positives are, how well Blizzard does to mitigate the damages, the guaranteed damages to balance, right? That I've put out there. Blizzard's trying to do what they can to mitigate it. They do something like, oh, we'll balance it in 2 to 3 days. Okay, but like that's one round of balancing. Like it literally took like 6 rounds of balancing for you to get your Witchwood cards right. Are you going to redo the balance every 2 to 3 days? Do we want you to redo the balance every 2 to 3 days? How will we know what things are in what buckets whenever? Or is that part just not important as well? And if that part's not important, that hurts the competitiveness of the game, as well as how players can apply skill to it. Because now you can't even apply informational skill to it, right? If balancing changes every 2 to 3 days, your burden of being a competitive player just goes higher. That's kind of the argument that was also the case for like your micro adjust for classes, right? Like if it happens so often, or if it happens in a way that people can't track, then the informational like advantage in gaming that you would do as a competitive player you can't do, or it becomes just the steady ramp where like the skill you're rewarding is like someone going in figuring out all this and then memorizing a whole bunch of numbers. Anyway, most importantly though, it's so how to evaluate good and bad and whether this overall change is good or bad, right? How good is the good? How much can Blizzard mitigate the damage that the guaranteed bad is going to cost? And most importantly, how much you subjectively care about each factor. So that comes into play with what kind of a player you are and how much you care about balance. And balance, which is why I defined it in the beginning, is not just 50-50 balance, it's also diversity balance, and it's also swing and fairness, right? Fairness balance. Diversity, fairness, 50-50 win rate. How much do you care about those? If you don't care about them that much, then this doesn't really apply to you. And competitive players may not care about balance. Because what is the definition of a competitive player? Someone who wants to win. You can give a competitive player a totally unbalanced game, and they will figure out the ways to keep the highest win rate. And they may be perfectly happy with it. You can give them a flat out broken game, and as long as they can navigate a way to be better than the people around them and apply some kind of skill, any kind of skill, some competitive players are like that. Some competitive players are okay with just winning. Some competitive players are okay with just winning and want to have fun and have things be interesting and stuff like that. And that's all fun. All fun. That's all fine. But that doesn't affect the balance of the game. So in the end, if you care, like how much you care about balance as defined by 50-50, as defined by diversity, as defined by fairness, over how much you care about either the competitive aspect of it or the like refreshing nature of having like card sets rotate in and out, or just the nostalgia factor of seeing your old wild cards again, that's going to determine whether you think this change is overall good or bad. What I'm trying to point out is that there is a massive amount of balance loss happening, and it will be only mitigated somewhat, never fully mitigated, no matter what Blizzard does. And in the short period, I'd say like 3 months, it's going to be pretty bad. What does pretty bad mean? It means the halfway point between the current meta and the Taverns of Time meta. That's where I'm gonna put the balancing at. I think that's where we're gonna be for 3 months, and it's not a great place to be. I'm certainly not happy about it, and it's not a price that I would be willing to pay if I were to choose. Of course, I don't get to choose, and people like me are probably few, and apparently fewer than I thought. Because I was lumping all the competitive players together, but some competitive players care less about fairness and less about diversity and care more about like winning and the other aspects of fun and things like that. Anyway, The wild rotation meta, it has costs. That's what I'm trying to say. That's my soapbox. And as a player of this game, as a player of Arena, as someone who cares about being good at this game and the deep strategies that go into it, which is why you listen to the Lightforge podcast, as someone who cares about the future of Arena, you should know where it's going. You don't have to agree with me on whether it's good or bad. Like I said, people evaluate things differently, but you have to acknowledge the cost. And if you're not acknowledging the cost properly, I don't see reasons why you would not acknowledge the cost. And I think there's not enough people there who are properly acknowledging the cost. Okay, that's my soapbox.
Oh yeah, woo, man. All right. Lot of points were made there. I especially like the part where you endlessly talked. Yeah, that was informative.
That's the full part. That's the full part. Nice to show that you've been paying attention.
Yeah, no, definitely that part where it was like 0.5 perfectly was it was a great follow up to your second point. And the sub point of number 3, that was I did not think of that one. All right, so great.
There were only 4 points.
Fantastic. Well, no, it was so eye opening. There was and I really separated out.
You created a 0.5 out of my
it was just so important. So it was obviously 5. I was paying attention. Okay, great. Yes, that was fantastic. Thank you for that insight. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, look. It's not like I'm gonna stop playing the arena, right? It's not like I'm gonna stop enjoying the arena. I just think Blizzard's taken this into a direction that's bad. And in case people think this is like a personal, like, I don't know, maybe like, oh, my win rate's going to go down or something, I'm going to adjust fine to this, guys. I have more informational advantage than anybody. I got the algorithm. And it gives us information we don't even make public because it's like so big and unwieldy. So whenever a meta changes in terms of the informational advantage on like the beginning, we have that advantage. In terms of the informational advantage you have after you play in the meta a while, other people who play more may have that advantage. But if Blizzard's going to keep changing the meta repeatedly very quickly in search of balance and then throw the whole thing over and come back, we have the most advantage. So it's not a personal thing. And when it comes to content, it couldn't be better for arena content creators, right? Like, whether there's more people playing the arena and caring about the arena or not, there's at least going to be a lot more for us to talk about. And we already find a lot to talk about. So all of these changes are great for for the GOAT's like professional interests, and for the GOAT's win rate. It's all gonna be good. Also, they made the change where, did you hear about this? Where leaderboards are gonna be every 2 months now for 30 runs. So we're both gonna be on the leaderboard every segment. Now we're not gonna be as high as we would be otherwise, because we're not gonna be able to like re-roll our 30 runs all that much. We're gonna be I think each of us plays like maybe 40 arena runs every 2 months on average. So other people are gonna re-roll that like 10 times, 15 times over the course of those 2 months, and we will re-roll it like half a time. So don't expect like really high placements for us for that kind of stuff. But at least we'll be on there. Right now we're like rarely ever there because we don't play 30 runs a month. So everything's good. Just personally though, it's going to be less skill based, less based on the relevant amount of skills that I think that I appreciate. All right. You have anything to add to this? Any kind of reactions, or not reactions, but more just like this things you want to say? Maybe get on a mini soapbox before we end this podcast. We got some.
No, I think this podcast is soapy enough and boxy enough. I think you took our quota of soaps and boxes and soapboxes for quite a few weeks, so I'll let that slide right there. Thank you for all of your contributions. Valid points were made. You expressed it so clear that I do not have to summarize any of it. Okay, that's good.
All right, that's good then. We're going to move on to our Hunter run. Just a reminder to all those listening, these things are also available on YouTube, the entire Lightforge podcast. And if you want to see my wonderful tan or Merps' muscles and expressions during, it's like having a troll right in the screen next to you like the entire time. Like as I'm giving this speech, I'm seeing Merps make these faces. But yeah, you can check out our YouTube, youtube.com/grinning goats. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a like, sub to the channel if you haven't yet. Yeah, and also the Arena Coop is this ongoing co-op series that me and Merps have done once a week since the beginning of Hearthstone almost. And we're going to do Hunter next. So definitely check that out too. All right. Until next week, when we delve deeper into the new rotation meta and hopefully have some news on the new expansion, maybe a new mechanic or something. Until next week, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. See you guys.